Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is the guy who essentially invented the concept of the famous serial killer. Between August and November of 1888, at least 5 women were murdered and mutilated in the Whitechapel district of London. In several cases, their organs were surgically removed and taken from the scene. The precision suggested medical knowledge. He was never caught. The police had suspects, but no case. Jack the Ripper killed 5 people, sent taunting letters to the press, signed with his own nickname, and then simply stopped. No arrest, no confession, nothing. Just a legacy of over 130 years of true crime speculation and at least a dozen books every decade claiming to have finally solved it. They haven't. He is the only serial killer in history whose unsolved case inspired an entire tourism industry. The servant girl Annihilator. 3 years before Jack the Ripper struck London, a killer was already prowling the streets of Austin, Texas. Between late 1884 and Christmas Eve 1885, someone murdered 8 people, attacking victims in their beds and dragging them outside to mutilate their bodies. Most of the early victims were black domestic servants, and the killer used an axe he found in their homes. Short story author O. Henry was living in Austin at the time and gave the killer his nickname. The murders stopped completely on Christmas Eve 1885 after the killer attacked 2 white women in different houses within hours of each other, which finally forced the city to take the investigation seriously. By then, he was gone. During the investigation, more than 400 different suspects were questioned and eventually released. The case is still unsolved. Some researchers believe the killer then boarded a ship to England and became Jack the Ripper. That theory has never been proven, but if true, it would mean one man terrorized 2 continents and the police on both sides missed him completely. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is what happens when a serial killer decides he also wants to be a puzzle designer. Between 1968 and 1969, he murdered at least 5 people in the San Francisco Bay Area, attacking couples in remote locations and a cab driver in the city. But what set him apart were the letters. He sent taunting letters to Bay Area newspapers signed with a crosshair symbol and included coded ciphers, daring police to figure out who he was. One of those ciphers went unsolved for over 50 years. A team of 3 amateur code breakers finally cracked it in 2020. The decoded message said he liked killing because it was fun. Despite numerous investigations and multiple theories about his identity, no one has ever been arrested, and the FBI investigation remains open. The Zodiac Killer is basically that one person in the group project who did the most work, made sure everyone knew about it, and then never showed up to the final presentation. The Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified serial killer active in and around New Orleans between May 1918 and October 1919. His whole approach was deeply personal. The victims were usually attacked with an axe that belonged to the victims themselves. He didn't bring a weapon. He found one in your house and used it on you. Police believe he was responsible for at least 5 murders and up to 17 attacks. The part that made him a legend, though, was the letter. On March 13, 1919, a letter purportedly from him was published in newspapers, stating he would kill again at 15 minutes past midnight on March 19th, but would spare any home where a jazz band was playing. That night, all the city's dance halls filled to capacity, and professional and amateur bands played jazz at parties at hundreds of houses around town. There were no murders that night. He basically forced an entire city to throw a concert under threat of death, and it worked. Then he disappeared. The attacker was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. The Cleveland Torso Murderer. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run is the serial killer who personally destroyed Eliot Ness's career. And if you know who Eliot Ness is, that's saying something. Between 1935 and 1938, an unidentified killer dismembered at least 12 people in Cleveland, Ohio, disposing of remains in the impoverished Kingsbury Run neighborhood. The signature was decapitation. Heads were frequently never found, bodies were rarely found whole, and just 2 of the 12 victims were ever identified. Police actually displayed a plaster cast of one victim's face and a diagram of his tattoos at the Great Lakes Exposition in 1936. Over 100,000 people saw the display, and no one could identify the man. The prime suspect was a surgeon named Francis Sweeney, who had the medical knowledge and access to facilities suited for dismembering bodies. Elliot Ness interrogated him for an entire week. No confession. After Sweeney committed himself to a sanatorium, the murders stopped. But that's not enough to convict someone, so the case technically remains open. If you're a surgeon who voluntarily checks yourself into a mental hospital right after a serial killer mysteriously stops killing, that's completely fine, apparently. The Texarkana Phantom Killer. In the spring of 1946, a town split across the Texas-Arkansas border became the setting for one of the most terrifying 10-week periods in American criminal history. The Phantom Killer struck 8 people, 5 of them fatally, targeting couples on lovers' lanes and quiet stretches of road at night. In the first attack, 2 young people were forced out of a parked car at gunpoint by an armed man whose face was hidden by a burlap sack with 2 slits cut out for his eyes. Both survived. The next couple was not so lucky, and neither was the one after that. The prime suspect was career criminal Ul Sweeney, linked to the murders by his wife's statements. After she refused to testify, prosecutors dropped the murder charges. The Texas Department of Public Safety once called these killings the #1 unsolved murder case in Texas history. The murders are also widely credited with directly inspiring the Hookman urban legend, the one about a couple parked on a dark road who find a bloody hook attached to their car door handle. So, if that story ever kept you up at night, you can specifically thank Texarkana for that. The Monster of Florence. Between 1968 and 1985, an unidentified killer murdered at least 16 people in the hills outside Florence, Italy. The victims were always couples parked in isolated areas at night. A .22 caliber Beretta handgun with the same type of Winchester bullets was used in every single attack across all those years, and that gun has never been recovered. In some murders, the killer also surgically removed body parts from the female victims and, in one case, mailed a piece of flesh to prosecutors in a taunting letter. The investigation became a masterclass in how not to run a serial murder case. Italian authorities arrested multiple people over the decades, got convictions, had them overturned, and then chased a conspiracy theory about wealthy Tuscans commissioning the murders for occult rituals. That theory also went nowhere. American crime writer Douglas Preston moved to Florence, researched the case, and was actually investigated by Italian police as a potential suspect during his own book research. It is widely believed that the actual killer was never caught. One of Europe's most prolific serial killers murdered 16 people across 17 years using the same gun, and the best thing investigators managed to produce was a conspiracy theory and an accused American author. The Doodler. Between January 1974 and the summer of 1975, a serial killer stalked San Francisco's gay community in what became one of the most challenging cold cases in American history. His method of approach was genuinely unique. He would frequent gay bars in the Castro, find a target, sit down and sketch their portrait, then show them the drawing as a way to strike up a conversation. That is how he earned the nickname the Doodler. He was an actual good artist, and he used that to his advantage. At least 6 men were stabbed to death, and 3 others survived attacks. Here is where it gets complicated. 3 prominent survivors, including a famous entertainer and a European diplomat, refused to testify because they still feared being publicly identified as gay men. Police identified a suspect. They questioned him. They believed they had the right person. But without testimony, there was no case. Investigators believe the suspect is now in his 70s and living in the East Bay area of San Francisco. The reward currently stands at $250,000. He is, in all likelihood, still alive. A serial killer who got away with it not because he was clever, but because the world at the time made it too dangerous for his own victims to speak up. If this helped you understand some of history's most baffling unsolved cases, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true crime explained simply. Thanks for watching.